legacy. From conquest to cradle, from ashes to hope. 14 generations across the waters of time. By R.E. Smith. This book is dedicated to my grandchildren. May you walk in the strength of your ancestors, rooted in the stories of those who came before you. This book is a gift of memory, a bridge across centuries, and a tribute to the men and women who made me who I am. It is not a work of fiction, but neither is it only fact. It is the soul of my family, carved in ink and carried forward in hope. I was born on a crisp September evening in 1971 in Providence, Rhode Island. But the true roots of my life were not in the city hospital where I drew my first breath. They were in Manville, a small village stitched into the larger town of Lincoln. Tucked along the Blackstone River, Manville was no more than a speck on the map to most. But to me, it was a whole world. I was raised in a home that pulsed with life and echoed with generations. Aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, we were thick as thieves and closer than close. There were always extra chairs out in the yard, always laughter in the air, and always someone ready with a story about one Smith or another. In the middle of it all was my grandfather, Kenneth Andrew Smith, a man whose quiet presence spoke volumes. He lived with us for most of my childhood, and I thank God every day that I got to grow up under the same roof, beneath his stories, and in the shadow of his legacy. Ours was a blue-collar community. We weren't rich in money, but we were wealthy beyond compare in something far more valuable: roots. Everyone knew everyone. Neighbors were more like extended family, and the streets carried the same names they had 100 years before. Even as a child, I knew I came from a long line of Smiths. The name echoed through the mills, the schools, the churches, and the cemeteries. I didn't understand it all back then, but I could feel it in my bones, that sense of belonging, of continuity. One day, I asked my grandfather a simple question. "Gramp, what nationality are we?" He didn't hesitate. With a sly grin, he said, "We're Rhode Islanders." I didn't grasp the weight of his answer at the time. I thought maybe he didn't hear me right, but I've come to realize over the years that he was exactly right. We weren't just from Rhode Island. We were Rhode Island. Our family story is part of the bedrock of that little state. My journey into our family's history began as a simple curiosity, but it quickly grew into something more. A calling, almost. The deeper I dug, the more I discovered that the Smiths weren't merely part of Rhode Island's past. They helped shape it. We are the descendants of settlers, soldiers, millworkers, and Mayflower passengers. Our roots stretch back to the founding of the state itself. This book is not about me. It is about us. It is a record, a tribute, and an attempt to capture the spirit of a family that helped build a place and, in doing so, built one another. It focuses on the paternal legacy of my grandfather, Kenneth A. Smith, and the ancestral line that runs through him. From the forests of Burrillville to the rivers of North Smithfield, from the first plowshares in the colonial dirt to the modern lives of his many descendants. This is our story. Family means everything to me. It is the anchor that holds me fast, the compass that points me forward, and the inheritance I hope to pass down unbroken. I write this not out of pride, but out of reverence. The Smith family isn't defined by fame or fortune, but by something far rarer: resilience, loyalty, and love. So if you are a Smith by name, by blood, or by heart, welcome. You are part of something much larger than yourself. May you find in these pages the same sense of wonder and belonging I found in my grandfather's eyes. The day he said, "We are Rhode Islanders." Let the story begin. Roots of Providence. The Smith Family Saga of Rhode Island. through salted seas and whispered prayers. A family crossed to new frontiers. With hands of toil and hearts of fire, they built a town, a state, a spire. From miller's wheel to captain's sword, their stories rise in whispered word. And now, as new leaves take their place, the Smith name holds its honored space. Roger Williams and the birth of a colony. In the chill of a Massachusetts winter, in 1635, a man walked away from the familiar comforts of the Puritan colonies and into the unknown. That man was Roger Williams, an English-born theologian and minister whose ideas were as radical as they were righteous. He believed that no government should meddle in the sacred realm of the soul. To the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, this was heresy. To Williams, it was divine truth. Exiled for preaching that church and state must be separate, Roger Williams wandered through the New England wilds. Cold, ill, and alone, he was sheltered by the Narragansett people, including my ancestor John the Miller Smith, who would become his allies and friends. From their generosity and from his own unshakable spirit, a new vision took root. In the spring of 1636, Williams stood beside a freshwater spring and named the land Providence, a nod to divine mercy. This would not be just another colonial outpost. It would be a haven, a place where conscience could breathe, where dissent was not punished but protected. It was a radical idea. The Miller's Path, from England to Rhode Island. A life across oceans and ages. Born in England in 1595, John, the Miller Smith, came into a world bound by tradition yet cracking beneath the weight of change. The Elizabethan Golden Age had ended, and the currents of religious upheaval and economic struggle had begun reshaping society. His father, John Cottrell Smith, born in 1576 and lived to 1639, came from Broughton, Northamptonshire, a place of old Saxon roots and new Puritan rumblings. Of John's mother, history remains hushed, yet her spirit echoed through the grit of the son she raised. At age 20, John married Alice Comstock Knight, born the same year as him in 1595. Their union began in Great Bedwin, Wiltshire, a lush English hamlet where stone cottages rose from hedgerows and the seasons dictated the rhythm of life. Alice, daughter of Samuel Comstock, who lived from 1575 to 1625, and Eliza Turner, 1573 to 1638, was a woman of steady spirit, drawn from lines of practical, God-fearing folk whose lives were etched in the furrows of English farmland. They had children, endured plague years, and weathered the simmering threat of civil war. But what changed their path forever was a choice to brave the Atlantic and seek a new life across the sea. The Great Crossing. By 1635, John and Alice joined the wave of Puritan emigrants fleeing persecution and seeking freedom in the New World. With only their faith, their children, and John's weather-worn tools, they crossed the Atlantic, a voyage marked by peril, cramped holds, and prayers whispered into churning winds. They landed among the banished, joining Roger Williams and his followers, who had been exiled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for daring to believe that conscience could be free from crown or church. This small, radical community began anew on the shores of the Seekonk River, founding Providence plantations. John the Miller Smith, the millwright of Providence. In the wintry hush of early 1636, a band of outcasts trudged through the thawing forest of New England. Among them walked John, no longer just a craftsman from Dorchester, but now a settler, a builder of something wholly new. He had been banished alongside Williams, yet he bore no resentment, only purpose. Beside a spring-fed creek beneath towering oaks, Williams and Smith paused. There, the seeds of Smithfield were sown, a township named not by royal decree, but by the labor of John's hands and the worth of his heart. With those same hands, he built the first grist mill, a sturdy frame of timber and stone powered by the river's restless flow. The wheel turned, and Providence found its rhythm. Every dawn, John rose before the sun. With soaked shoulders and steady breath, he tended the stones, greased the gears, and welcomed the farmers with their burlap sacks of grain. But the mill was more than machinery. It was sanctuary, a place where neighbors gathered to share stories, pray for rain, and barter news. John offered not just flour but fairness, serving as an unofficial judge and peacemaker in disputes. By 1646, the region was colloquially known as Smith's Mills, and the site of John's mill is believed to be near the modern Smith Appleby House at 220 Stillwater Road, in Smithfield, Rhode Island. Even Roger Williams wrote admiringly in his journal, "John Smith's steady hand in mill and town binds us more than any charter or creed." Alice, the quiet strength beside the wheel. Alice's role was never inscribed in legal charters, but it was carved into the marrow of the community. She bore children while tending a harsh land, taught them their letters and their prayers, and quietly stitched the fabric of home from linen, scripture, and love. She buried her parents back in England, her father Samuel in 1625, her mother Eliza in 1638, before crossing the sea herself. Her resilience was not flashy, but unyielding. While John built a town, Alice built a family. Together, they bore. John Smith Jr. from 1641 to 1681, and Elizabeth Smith Manton. Their son would go on to marry Sarah Whipple, who lived from 1641-1687, intertwining the Smith line with other foundational Rhode Island families, such as the Whipples, Arnolds, and Watermans. Final years and legacy. John passed in May 1648, aged 53, a short life by today's standards, but a full one in a world so newly born. When he died, the skies wept, and the townsfolk gathered not only to mourn, but to give thanks. Roger Williams, old now, spoke over his coffin. He turned not just grain, but a people. His mill was Providence's cradle. Alice followed shortly after, passing sometime after September 2, 1650. The colony, still young and fragile, was stronger because of her. Her name may be found less in the official records, but it is written in the legacy of every Smith that followed. Legacy of grain and grace. From one humble mill, Smithfield was born, and through John and Alice's unwavering resolve, a lineage took root in the stony soil of Rhode Island. One built not on conquest or gold, but on service, resilience, and the turning of a millstone. Their grandson, Stephen Smith, and those who followed, would carry this flame, each generation forging onward with the same quiet dignity that defined the first. And in that place, even today, where the river still runs and old stones remain, one can almost hear the creak of a wooden wheel, the voice of a miller, and the soft song of a woman at the hearth. From English fields to waters wide, the miller crossed with hopeful stride. His hands on stone, his heart with faith, built futures in a wilderness wraith. John Smith, a name both plain and proud, whose legacy speaks silent but loud. In grain and grit through time it flows, where Providence's green meadow grows. From England's fields to wild frontier, a mother's love enduring clear. Through ocean's roar and untamed land, she clasped her kin with steady hand. Alice, the name whispered low, in hearth and heart the roots would grow. A beacon through the shifting tide, the silent strength at family's side. Keeper of the wheel, keeper of the flame. When John Smith II was born in 1641 in Dorchester, Massachusetts, the world he entered was still raw with possibility. The trees of New England whispered the names of founders, and the rivers carried the reflections of men who dared to dream of a freer life. His father, John the Miller, had already set the wheel of Providence turning. Now it was John II's turn to keep it in motion. As a boy, John would sit by the side of the grist mill, watching the wheel turn with hypnotic rhythm. He learned to read not only scripture and ledgers, but the language of water and stone. By the time he came of age, he knew every creak of the mill's timbers, every bend of the river, and every sigh of the grindstone. To some, the mill was machinery. To John, it was the breath of Providence. When he married Sarah Whipple, the union was not just of man and woman, but of legacy and purpose. The Whipples were a family of civic pride and quiet strength builders and thinkers with a reputation for integrity. With Sarah beside him, John expanded the family estate and opened the mill to wider trade, supplying grain and flour to communities beyond Smithfield. He never charged more than was fair, and more than once he took payment in labor or promise when hard times struck his neighbors. He was not a preacher, yet his voice carried like a sermon. He was not elected, yet his word settled disputes. He did not wear a sword, but many saw him as the town's quiet defender, a man who wielded his honor like a blade. During the lean years when floods came or crops failed, John kept the mill open by candlelight. He and Sarah would work through the night, grinding the last of the stored grain to ensure every family had bread. His hands were calloused, his shoulders thick with labor, but his eyes remained bright with conviction. He served his town not only through work, but in presence. He attended every town meeting, even when others stayed home in foul weather. He helped settle land disputes, and his signature appears on early records as a witness, a neighbor, and, sometimes when no one else would, an advocate for the poor or misunderstood. He and Sarah raised many children, and each one was taught not only how to tend the land, but how to carry themselves as smiths, with humility, strength, and loyalty. His eldest son, Benjamin, inherited more than a name. He inherited a spirit forged in grindstone and grace. In his later years, John was known as Father Smith, not by blood alone, but by the role he played in the village. When he walked to the meeting house, children stepped aside with reverence. When he sat beneath the oak beside the mill, others gathered, drawn by the slow thunder of his wisdom. At the age of 40, when fire threatened to consume the mill, he organized a brigade to beat back the flames with buckets and wet sacks. The town saved the mill, but it was said John saved the town. When he passed in 1681, mourners arrived from every corner of Providence and beyond. Roger Williams himself, old and frail, is said to have stood in silent mourning beside the river where John had once patched the wheel with his own shirt. The eulogy was simple, spoken by a neighbor. John Smith the younger turned more than grain in this land. He turned hearts toward one another. He turned toil into peace. He turned a wheel that fed not only the belly, but the soul. guardians of the community flame. Born in 1672 into the sturdy arms of Providence, Benjamin Smith was his father's son in every noble sense. He had his mother's calm eyes and his father's enduring hands, hands built for labor, hands that would shape a town's future. Where John II brought structure to the mill, Benjamin brought its spirit into every corner of the growing colony. In 1693, Benjamin married Mercy Angell, daughter of John Angell II and Ruth Field, a woman of intellect and steadfast heart. The Angell family, long known for their civic engagement and faith, brought with Mercy a new spark to the Smith legacy. Their union was one of both affection and ambition, covenant of two families whose destinies were written into the roots of Rhode Island. Benjamin continued to run the mill, but expanded its role beyond flour and grain. Under his leadership, the mill became a gathering place, a message post, a shelter in hard winters, and a symbol of steadfastness in years when storm or war loomed near. It was said that no family in Smithfield went without bread, while Benjamin walked the riverbank. Where his father was a quiet presence, Benjamin was a voice, firm but fair. He served on local councils, helped resolve land disputes, and was a known advocate for community schooling. He believed in the power of an educated mind and a compassionate hand. If a neighbor's barn fell, Benjamin was there with tools. If a child was orphaned, he and Mercy offered refuge. Their home became a waypoint for travelers and the weary, and their table never lacked for extra bread or extra chairs. Benjamin and Mercy raised a family steeped in purpose. Their children, including Captain John Smith, Solomon Smith, and Abigail Smith, Arnold, would carry forth the intertwined legacies of mill and mission. Through Abigail's marriage to the Arnold family, yet another great Rhode Island name joined the Smith tapestry. Benjamin lived to the age of 79, a remarkable span in those days, and witnessed the rising pulse of liberty that would soon swell into revolution. Though he died before the Declaration rang out, his sons would march in that righteous cause, their patriotism forged in his example. When Benjamin passed in 1751, it was said that Smithfield paused, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Because in the life of Benjamin Smith, the town saw the best of itself. Mercy Angell, ever at his side, had passed 30 years earlier in 1721, her memory preserved not only in name, but in deed. Her descendants remembered her as both strength and song, a woman who held the hearth even as she shaped the world beyond it. Together, Benjamin and Mercy had kindled a fire, one that warmed a community, lit the path of generations, and still glows in the heart of every Smith who dares to dream of something greater than themselves. In the mill's hum and the quiet dignity of honest lives, the legacy of Benjamin and Mercy endures. Patriots of Providence. Born in the year 1702, Solomon Smith was the embodiment of 3 generations worth of grit, grace, and gritstone dust. A son of Benjamin and Mercy, Solomon grew up within earshot of the churning wheel and the voices of townsfolk who came not only for flour, but for hope. The mill was more than a business. It was a sacred trust, and from his boyhood, Solomon understood that legacy was not inherited. It was earned. He married Sarah Dexter in 1723, a woman from the venerable Dexter family, herself descended from early settlers whose footprints helped form the town's very borders. Sarah was steady as riverstone and twice as enduring. Their partnership was marked by quiet harmony, mutual respect, and an unwavering commitment to their growing town. Solomon did not merely inherit the mill, he revitalized it. As the town swelled and tensions in the colonies stirred, he expanded operations, trading not only within Rhode Island, but to ports beyond. He oversaw the construction of new grain storage, refined the mill's water channels, and was even said to have crafted a novel grindstone design that increased output by a third. But Solomon was more than a miller. He was a sentinel of his people. When disputes rose between landholders or feuds erupted over trade, Solomon's voice, firm and measured, often served as resolution. He served in the town council, occasionally donning the militia uniform, and was even present during the early stirrings of revolutionary talk. At his hearth, Solomon was a different kind of leader, gentle, warm, a man who quoted scripture as easily as he spun tales from his youth. Sarah was the quiet engine of their household, raising children with grace and ensuring the Smith-Dexter home was always open to neighbor and stranger alike. Together, they raised children who would live to see the American Revolution with their father's name upon their hearts. Their son, Ezekiel Smith, would rise as a captain in the militia, laying down his life in 1777, believed to be in defense of the very freedoms Solomon and his forebears had helped cultivate. Solomon passed in 1771, his hands worn but never idle, his reputation sealed in the foundation of a town that still spoke his name with honor. Sarah followed him 8 years later. In 1779, her passing marked with hymns and flowers gathered from the fields she had once walked with him hand in hand. In the quiet bend of the river where their home once stood, some say the air still hums like a millstone, steady, faithful, and true. Solomon and Sarah, the last bridge between settlement and revolution, whose lives turned the wheels of liberty long before the cry of independence rang out. Forge of the Republic. In the stirrings of colonial unrest and the final chapters before American independence, Captain John Smith emerged from the proud line of Smith Millers as both a keeper of tradition and a harbinger of revolution. Born the son of Solomon Smith and Sarah Dexter, John grew up amid the creak and hum of the mill wheel, his hands powdered in flour and his ears filled with tales of duty and resilience. But John was never bound solely to the wheel. He was called to the world beyond it. While his heart remained tethered to the land of his fathers, the rumblings of revolution awakened in him a purpose larger than Smithfield. He married Sarah Arnold, a woman of piercing intellect and resolute grace. The Arnolds were no strangers to politics or philosophy, and Sarah matched John's fire with her own quiet strength. Together they embodied the very soul of Rhode Island, independent in thought, loyal in heart, and unwavering in cause. When war loomed, John was among the first to muster. Taking the title of captain, he led a militia company comprised of neighbors, kin, and sons of farmers who had once ground grain at his father's mill. These were not professional soldiers, but patriots, men who fought for soil and soul. Captain Smith drilled them with the discipline of a man who understood the weight of legacy. He wore no ornate coat, only a leather vest stitched by Sarah's own hand. His leadership was legendary. It was said that in battle, John moved with a calm fury, issuing orders with precision and tending wounded with his own hands when the musket fire paused. His men would follow him not out of fear, but out of faith. When not at war, he returned to the mill, helping to keep its stone alive and turning, grinding both wheat and wisdom for a community that saw him as anchor and compass. Sarah managed their home and their children with steely devotion, tending not only to hearth but to justice, as she helped coordinate supplies, letters, and morale among the village women. Captain John Smith was never one to boast, but his legacy echoed long after his final campaign. In the decades to come, tales of his stand at the skirmish near Pawtuxet River would be told with reverence, not as myth, but as measure. He died in the closing years of the century, not from wounds, but from the wear of a life wholly given. Sarah followed some years after, surrounded by grandchildren who had never seen battle, but who bore the fire of freedom in their eyes. Together, they were not only protectors of the Smith legacy, they were its renaissance. They proved that heritage could evolve, that tradition could bleed into transformation, and that the soul of a town could rise anew with each generation. Captain John and Sarah, the Smiths who stood between mill and musket, whose love and loyalty forged one family's enduring republic. The old stones at Burrillville don't speak, but they hum. A low-root, deep song of men like Stephen, who carved life from earth, and left it richer than they found it. Pillars in the Quiet Century. Born on December 3, 1751, beneath the whispering pines of Gloucester, Rhode Island, Stephen Smith came into the world as revolution loomed on the horizon. The son of Captain John Smith and Sarah Arnold, his lineage traced back to Rhode Island's founding stock families forged in faith, resistance, and land. Where his father bore the title captain, perhaps through coastal trade or militia service, Stephen bore the quiet strength of a man built not for war alone, but for what came after. He was the eldest of a robust farmstead clan: Israel, Simeon, Nicholas, Silas, Mary, Zilpha, a house filled with flint hard hands and biblical names. Raised among stone walls, hand-hewn beams, and Sabbath reverence, Stephen learned that true strength was steadiness. At just 20, with rebellion whispering in town halls and over plowshares, Stephen stood his ground in Gloucester. Though we find no definitive record of him in battle, he appears in the 1774 census and again in 1777. A man who did not flee when war came to the gates. He remained. He endured. In April of 1772, he married Abigail Fetplace, the daughter of Samuel Fetplace. Hers was a heritage less chronicled, but no less potent, steeped in diligence, spiritual depth, and community grace. Abigail could steady a room with a glance, teach a child their letters by candlelight, and offer bread and balm to the sick without ceremony. She was the quiet matron whose love made a house a home. They settled not far from the turning wheel of Smithfield, by the familiar waters of the Woonasquatucket. Though the world had changed since the days of John the Miller, the Smith family's legacy endured in that wheel's endless rhythm. The mill, now more modestly modernized under Stephen's care, was no longer the frontier's lifeline, but remained the soul of the township. Stephen introduced improved milling techniques learned from Massachusetts traders and replaced the wooden wheel with a sturdier one, yet never compromised the integrity of the work. No shortcuts, no empty flour. He was precise in labor and language. His ledgers, preserved in archives, read like a quiet man's diary, notes of grain, weather, births, and kindness, paid in kindness, withheld for better days. They were more than transactions, they were philosophy. While Stephen held stewardship over the land and trade, Abigail turned their home into a sanctuary. In a sunlit room, she taught neighborhood children to read and count. She hosted scripture gatherings, delivered soup to the sick, and mothered not just her own children, but the community itself. Their family grew. Rachel in 1773, Samuel in 1778, Maury in 1781, John in 1787, and Stephen Jr. around 1788. These children inherited the same balance of grit and grace. Blacksmiths, millers, teachers, matriarchs, pioneers. Together they bridged two eras: colonial hardship and American promise. Stephen's life was marked not by conquest, but cultivation. In 1811, he purchased land in Burrillville, and in 1816, he sold property near Walter Fett Place. His likely in-law, further cementing ties between these two Rhode Island lineages. Even in his later years, he and Abigail managed inherited land from her father's estate, revealing her equal hand in the family's affairs. He lived to see the rise and fall of the first four American presidents, to witness muskets give way to machinery, and to feel the rumble of railroads inching toward Providence. He passed in October 1836, just shy of 85, beneath the same oak he once sat by with his grandson, telling stories of the river's memory and the duty of names. Abigail followed 3 winters later, her passing as soft as the hymns sung around her candlelit bed. She left behind more than lineage, she left a moral compass. Together, Stephen and Abigail Smith were still water and steady stone, their love rarely spoken, always felt. Their legacy is not only inked in public records or bound in genealogies, it's alive in the rhythm of lives they touched and the generations they quietly fortified. They did not chase fame or fortune, they fortified a town. And in the whisper of turning wheels, in sunlit schoolrooms, and in the quiet dignity of a ledger's final line, their memory endures. Torchbearers of the turning wheel. In the gentle hush of the early 19th century, a new generation stepped into the stream of legacy. Stephen Smith Jr., son of Stephen Smith and Abigail Fett Place, was born with the rhythms of the river and the mill etched into his bones. His birth carried both a name and an expectation, one he would uphold with quiet nobility. He married Joanna Fett Place, a distant cousin and beloved daughter of the same soil. Joanna was known for her botanical wisdom and the way she could coax life from even the stingiest plot of earth. Together, they embodied a rare harmony, his steadiness a ballast to her blossoming joy. Stephen Jr. did not inherit the mill, but was a simple farmer. The Smith Mill still opened its doors to the poor, still measured grain with fairness, and still echoed with the values of those who built it before. Joanna, meanwhile, turned their homestead into a refuge of learning and life. She raised bees, cultivated medicinal herbs, and tutored young women in reading, mathematics, and botany. Her remedies became legend, and it was said she had a tea for every ache, a verse for every grief. Stephen Jr. was elected to the town council 3 times and turned it down twice. The 3rd time, he accepted, not for pride, but out of duty. He oversaw road building, helped establish a local library, and fought for fair prices at the grain market when unscrupulous traders threatened the town's welfare. Stephen inherited his father's love for family legacy and his space in the Smith Benevolent Society in Smithfield, RI. They raised 4 children on a family farm, and each carried something of their parents, a deep respect for land, for truth, and for the invisible thread that binds neighbor to neighbor. When Joanna passed in 1842, 100 mourners brought sprigs of lavender and wild mint to her grave, a tribute to the healer who had once mended them all. Stephen Jr. followed in 1847. Through faith, fairness, and the wisdom of 2 steady hearts, Stephen Jr. and Joanna kept the soul of Smithfield alive for a new century. The millwright and the teacher of hope. As dawn broke on the latter half of the 19th century, a new kind of Smith stood by the wheel. Nicholas Smith, son of Stephen Smith Jr. and Joanna Fetplace inherited not only the stone and timber of the family's legacy, but also the quiet flame of its purpose. Nicholas was a homesteader in the truest sense, more engineer than farmer, more thinker than tradesman. His hands, though strong from labor, were drawn often to sketches and scrolls of paper. He believed in the perfect angle, the optimal pitch of the wheel blade, the efficiency of flow. He married Angeline Payne, a schoolteacher of sharp wit and softer voice. Angeline had grown up among books and blackboards, her mind a trove of poetry and principle. Where Nicholas saw the world in force and form, Angeline saw it in rhyme and reason. Together, they became something greater, a balance of head and heart. Nicholas processed wood for new homes rising across Smithfield. He didn't just cut lumber, he built opportunity. Young men apprenticed under him, and he taught them not only how to shape wood, but how to shape a life rooted in honesty and endurance. Angeline, meanwhile, transformed their parlor into a makeshift school for children whose families couldn't afford formal lessons. Her chalkboard rested beside dried herbs, her desk beside Nicholas's plans. She taught dozens to read, to count, and, most importantly, to think. The couple became a beacon for the town. Their gatherings were filled with song, spirited debate, and stories of old. In a time when many forgot their roots, Nicholas and Angeline deepened theirs. They hosted community workdays, mended fences and hearts alike, and insisted that legacy was not in what you owned, but in what you passed on. Nicholas passed in 1888, his final years filled with the satisfaction of work well done and a family strong in spirit. Angeline followed soon after, her funeral attended by former pupils who had become doctors, preachers, mothers, and leaders. To this day, locals say that if you stand quiet by the river, you can hear her reciting poetry on the wind, and the steady clack of Nicholas's wheel beneath. Nicholas and Angeline, the architect and the educator, who gave Smithfield a future rooted in knowledge and craft. The Iron Oak and the Guiding Lantern. In the twilight of the 19th century, as railroads stitched America together and industry breathed fire into once quiet towns, Warren McClellan Smith stood as a man of enduring principle. The son of Nicholas Smith and Angeline Payne, Warren was born on April 11, 1864, in the mill-woven village of Burrillville, Rhode Island. He came into a world half-rooted in old ways, half-rearing toward invention. Warren was named for a revolutionary hero and raised under the twin lights of craftsmanship and education. From a young age, he worked the land and the forge, his hands roughened by the hard truth of rural labor. He would grow into a blacksmith, a builder, and sometime poet, coaxing iron into purpose and ink into meaning. Beneath the soot and sweat, Warren scribbled verses in the margins of his mother's schoolbooks, odes to rivers, labor, and the laughter of children at play. On September 3, 1887, Warren married Harriet Hattie Dixon, a woman 5 years his senior but his equal in resolve. Born November 1859 in Smithfield, Hattie carried a lineage traced through Owen A. Dixon and Emmeline Brown, a line etched with hard-earned grace and perseverance. By the time she met Warren, she had already faced life's storms, raising a son, Bernard, before their union, and surviving the grief of lost siblings. Together, Warren and Hattie built a family on shared ground, love, toil, and unflinching commitment. They raised at least 6 children: Bernard, John, Marcus, Annie, Edward, and possibly more. Each child bore their mark: strength from Warren, gentleness from Hattie, and a steady legacy of Rhode Island grit. Their home sat near the old Smith Mill, now creaking from age but still whispering stories. Though the wheels slowed, the couple moved forward. Warren built the future barns, bridges, and the first iron plow in Smithfield. People said he spoke little, but worked loud. During the 1894 flood, it was Warren who lashed a ferry and hauled families to safety. When the chapel burned, he rebuilt it, iron braces shaped by his own hands. Hattie was no less a builder. She created community, hosting gatherings, teaching English to newcomers, and painting wildflowers on pantry doors. She raised children with lullabies and discipline, and gave each child a garden plot and a journal, a place to plant and to dream. They were known in the town as the Iron Oak and the Guiding Lantern. He, a man of roots and resolve. She, a woman of light and legacy. Warren's life unfolded alongside the dramatic changes of his era. He was a boy during the Civil War's echo, a man through industrial might, and a father by the time the world lurched toward the Great War. In every moment, he held true. Hattie passed in 1923. Warren followed her 8 years later on February 1, 1931, returning to the same Burrillville earth where he was born. They now rest in North Scituate, side by side beneath a sky that knows their names. Warren and Hattie were not merely residents of Rhode Island. They were its makers. He shaped iron. She shaped souls. Together they forged a family that would carry firelight into the future. From the Book of Smiths, imagined but true. The life and legacy of Edward Smith. Some men are forged in fire, others in silence. Edward Smith was forged in both. Born on October 12, 1892, in the wooded village of Tarkeln in Burrillville, Rhode Island, Edward Smith entered a world caught in the twilight of the 19th century. He was the son of Warren McClellan Smith and Harriet Hattie Dixon, a couple rooted deep in Rhode Island's agrarian past. Their family names stretched across the stony hills of Providence County like the stone walls that framed the fields of their forebears. Edward descended from Mayflower lines and Rhode Island founders' lines, as well as sons and daughters of the American Revolution, a bloodline etched into the foundation of early America. Edward's early years were not gilded with luxury, but grounded in toil, reverence, and the rhythms of rural life. In 1900, he lived with his parents in Burrillville, already showing the quiet resilience that would define him. By 1910, he had moved to North Smithfield, a young man on the edge of adulthood. He would never be far from family, yet he always seemed to be walking ahead of time itself, a stride marked by duty and decency. As the drums of World War I echoed across the Atlantic, Edward registered for the draft in 1917. Though he never saw the trenches of France, the very act of registration was a mark of loyalty. He was, after all, a New Englander through and through, stoic, principled, and willing to stand when called. In the waning days of war, on August 30, 1918, Edward married Marion Isabel Ballou, a bright-eyed woman born in 1899 who would become both his muse and anchor. They married in North Smithfield, and their union bore not just children, but a legacy. In a small home nestled among oaks and granite, Edward and Marion brought 8 children into the world. Leon Edward in 1919, Kenneth Andrew in 1921, Edward Carleton in 1924, Frederick Earl in 1927, George Howard in 1929, William A. in 1932, Henry A. in 1934, Marion Susie in 1937. Each of them, in turn, would live full lives, some serving in the military, others contributing to their communities. Through them, Edward's name would stretch like a river through the decades. Edward's life was not untouched by sorrow. His mother, Hattie, died in 1923, a blow softened only by the family he was building. His father, Warren, passed in 1931, but it was in 1939, the year war once again ignited the world, that Edward faced his deepest grief. Marion, his partner of 21 years, died at just 40 years old. Left a widower at 46, Edward stood amidst his children like a weather-worn pine in a New England storm, scarred but unbroken. Despite the aching silence Marion left behind, Edward pressed forward. By the 1940 census, he was listed as head of household and widowed, living in North Smithfield, a town he would never truly leave in spirit. He worked, he raised his children, and when the Second World War came knocking, he registered once again in 1942, this time as part of the old man's draft. At age 50, he may not have been bound for battlefields, but his contribution to the wartime home front was no less vital. In the quiet hours of his later years, Providence became his harbor. It was there he met Georgiana Edith Carmel Vincelet Smith, a strong-willed woman with a kindness Edward hadn't known since Marion. On May 12, 1951, they married in Woonsocket, and for the next 7 years, Georgiana was his companion, confidante, and caretaker. Together, they wove a gentle twilight chapter into Edward's story. Edward died on November 21, 1958, in Roger Williams Hospital in Providence, at the age of 66. The cause was peritonitis, but death did not erase him. He was laid to rest in Burrillville, back in the soil that had once cradled his cradle. His grave rests in Section 8, Lot 9, north of Pascagoula Cemetery, not far from where he first drew breath. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Proverbs 13:22. Edward Smith did exactly that. A gentle giant in wartime and peace. Born in the warmth of a Tarkiln summer on August 5, 1921, Kenneth Andrew Smith came into a world still recovering from the First Great War, but unknowingly teetering on the edge of another. His roots were Rhode Island stone, solid, weathered, and enduring. Son of Edward Smith and Marion Isabel Ballou, Kenneth bore the weight of legacy, his veins coursing with the blood of Mayflower pilgrims and early Providence settlers. His childhood home, nestled among mill towns and forested ridgelines, was one where the language was labor and the faith was family. Tragedy struck early. Kenneth's mother, Marion, died when he was just 18. In her absence, the family leaned on Kenneth's steady nature. He'd always been a quiet force in a household full of noise, content to listen, learn, and lead by example. By age 14, Kenneth was laboring at a local textile mill in Tarkiln, loading and unloading trucks. It was a young boy's job, but his hands worked like a man's, and soon enough, he was a full-fledged weaver, a craft passed down through Smith men like a sacred rite. Yet it was love, not lineage, that defined his most heroic moment. Ethel May was a young woman whose life had already been shaped by challenge. She bore a son out of wedlock at a time when society did not forgive such things easily. Where others turned their backs, Kenneth stepped forward. He married Ethel, not out of duty, but out of a deep, unwavering conviction. He gave her son not just his name, but a place in his heart and family. That act, quiet, unheralded, spoke volumes about the kind of man Kenneth was. When World War II came, Kenneth answered the call, trading the rhythm of mill machines for the chaos of war. Stationed in the Philippine Islands, he served with distinction. His wartime diary, preserved to this day, offers glimpses into the heart of a man who never sought glory. His words dwell not on triumph, but on heat, hunger, and homesickness, on the daily courage it took to get up and face another day. His service was a bridge between duty and devotion. Back home, Ethel was no less a warrior. She raised their growing family alone during the war years, managing a household through uncertainty, rationing, and grief. With quiet resolve, she kept the family warm, fed, and grounded. Her strength was not in defiance, but in perseverance. Her children never went without, and the fire in the hearth never died. Kenneth returned home to a life of humble routine. He worked as an auto mechanic at Smiley's garage, then returned to the mills, first at Stamina Mills, which then became Desmond Mill. He retired not once but twice, proof that some men are just not built for idleness. He preferred a life of work, of hands busy with purpose. Kenneth's joys were simple: family suppers, fishing trips, and Sunday drives. He wasn't loud, but his presence was as anchoring as the oaks outside his home. Together, Kenneth and Ethel raised a family that would stretch across generations. Their children bore the strength of their father and the wisdom of their mother. Their grandchildren remember Kenneth as soft-spoken, gentle, and wise, the kind of grandfather who could fix anything and always had a story tucked away for just the right moment. Ethel, with her grace and grit, became the matriarch who taught kindness with her hands and defended her family with her heart. Kenneth passed in 1997 in North Providence. Ethel lived on until 2012, seeing great-grandchildren laugh, stumble, and grow. She was the guiding lantern, the quiet voice of encouragement long after Kenneth's hands had stilled. Their story is not carved into monuments, but it is etched into memory, into the veins of every Smith descendant who ever paused by a spinning mill, or who found courage in love, or dignity in hard work. Because of Kenneth and Ethel, the Smith name marches on, not in parades or politics, but in the arms of family, in the walls of old homes, and in the silent strength of those who know where they come from. Together, they were the iron oak and the guiding lantern, the soul and the shield of a Rhode Island family forged in love, labor, and legacy. Fire and iron, the Smith spirit reforged. In the turbulent echo of post-war America, when the dust of World War II settled but the social fabric of the nation stirred again with unrest, a boy was born in the quiet mill town of Burrillville, Rhode Island. His name was Roy Edward Smith Sr., and like the forge-hardened lineage that birthed him, he would carry a legacy of fire and iron in his blood. Born on March 28, 1948, Roy was the son of Kenneth Andrew Smith, a World War II veteran and hardworking New Englander, and Ethel Mae Smith, a pillar of steady grace and tenacity. He was the fifth of 10 children, raised in a household marked by both love and hardship. The loss of 2 brothers, Frederick at 20 and Richard at just 10, etched sorrow into the family story early, and those scars forged a sense of protection and fierce loyalty in Roy's soul. His youth unfolded in the industrial rhythms of Rhode Island's aging mill villages. Summers buzzed with the sound of crickets and clanging tools. Winters blanketed life in snow and labor. Life was not luxurious, but it was rich in character. From his earliest years, Roy displayed the telltale signs of a man made for purpose. Quietly observant, hands-on, and determined not to repeat the mistakes of generations past. But it wasn't just fire and grit that shaped Roy, it was love. He met Patricia Ann McQueen in the early 1960s at the Fillmore Terrace Apartments in Providence. She was a young woman with a calm spirit and a spark in her eyes. Patricia had her own storied lineage, born March 17, 1949, to James Grimmond McQueen. a proud and private man, and Ruth Dorothy Aimondi, a woman who embodied quiet Italian strength. Together, Patricia's parents built a home full of faith, discipline, and music values she would later pass down. From the start, Patricia was drawn to Roy's confidence. He was drawn to her resilience. Their love was not a whirlwind, but a forge, steady, hot, and unyielding. On April 5, 1969, still teenagers, they eloped across the Massachusetts line to Seekonk, with Roy's brother Kenny and sister-in-law by their side. Their marriage began humbly in South Providence, but it would become the cornerstone of a great family saga. A brief chapter in Daytona, Florida, taught them that not every journey bears fruit, but every journey teaches. They returned north, wiser and stronger. Their apartment at 72 Railroad Street in Manville became the heart of the Smith family. It wasn't just a home, it was a shared fortress. A six-family dwelling housing 5 of Roy's siblings and their families. It echoed with laughter, clashing personalities, shared suppers, and cousins tumbling downstairs. It was the modern-day equivalent of an ancestral longhouse, and in its warmth, a tribe was forged. Roy Sr. became a volunteer firefighter in Manville, stepping into the role of protector with courage and discipline. He trained as an EMT, ran heavy rescue operations, drove fire trucks through snowstorms, and taught emergency medicine in an era when few knew CPR. He was a mechanic by trade, running a tow service, plowing roads by night, fixing vehicles by day, and working side by side with police departments to clear wrecks and rescue the stranded. Through it all, Patricia was the center of the home, a soft voice in the chaos, a steady hand on the tiller. She raised 3 sons, Roy Jr., William, and Richard, with strength and nurture, never compromising the sacred task of motherhood. Her hands sewed clothes, cleaned wounds, packed lunches, and built dreams. She gave her children more than a roof. She gave them roots. Roy Sr. was a hard man in the way that the world needed hard men, fair, honest, protective, and wise. He didn't tolerate laziness, but he'd give you the shirt off his back if you earned it. To strangers, he might seem rough, blunt, unbending, but to those he loved, his heart was warm as a summer engine, always running, always ready. When his granddaughter, Nicole Ann Smith Chandler, was born in 1994, Roy found his legacy embodied in a new light. Her children, Mary Jane, Jameson, and Octavia, are the bright embers of a long-burning flame. Today, Roy walks the family homestead in Monticello, Florida, no longer answering fire calls, but still tending to the land and legacy he built with his own 2 hands. Patricia, his lifelong partner, is still his anchor. She now shares her wisdom with great-grandchildren, especially Mary Jane, teaching her to sew, to cook, and to create with love. Roy sees in that little girl the same spark that once danced in a Providence apartment all those decades ago. Reflections on the lineage. Roy Edward Smith Sr. descends from Mayflower passengers and Rhode Island founders, a living bridge from the colonial mills of Burrillville to the red clay of the Florida Panhandle. Through hardship and heartbreak, through love and loyalty, he forged a life that matters, not because of fame, but because of fidelity. Patricia Ann McQueen Smith carries a legacy just as profound, an unbroken chain of nurturing souls, strong in silence, gentle in power. Their shared story is one of iron and lace, of duty and devotion. And the wheel continues turning, generation to generation, driven by the fire they lit, and the iron they refused to let cool. Wings of the eagle and strength of the equine. Roy Edward Smith Jr. was born on a cool September evening in 1971 in Providence, Rhode Island. The firstborn son of Roy Edward Smith Sr. and Patricia Ann McQueen Smith, Roy carried the legacy of generations rooted deep in Rhode Island soil, traced to the founders and Mayflower passengers who braved wild seas and wild lands. But Roy's journey would be one of his own, winding, burning, and reborn. His early years were grounded in Manville, a close-knit mill town filled with the rumble of trains and the smell of burning coal. His father worked hard to keep food on the table, and his mother anchored the home with resolve. In his teenage years, Roy took on the role of volunteer firefighter, following his father's footsteps into service. It wasn't a badge that drove him, but a deep inner compass pointing toward duty. Before manhood fully took root, Roy became a father. The relationship with his first partner was brief, but it left him with an awakened sense of responsibility. Carrying that with him like a shield, he moved forward, and forward meant growth. In May 1991, at his sister Gail's house, Roy met Anna Marisa Goodwin, known to many as Lisa. Born in Portsmouth, Virginia in 1968, Lisa was the daughter of Donald Ellsworth Goodwin and Ana Antonia Espinal Suarez, a Dominican-born matriarch whose strength and story would ripple through Lisa's life. Lisa, too, was navigating the aftermath of a former relationship. Her son, Jose Loas Amarante, born in 1989, had made her a mother, just as Roy had been made a father. From the start, their bond was forged in shared struggle. The early years were rocky, marked by emotional baggage and hard-earned trust. But what endured was love. In August 1994, their daughter, Nicole Ann Smith, was born in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. She carried the brightness of her mother and the fierce soul of her father. Roy and Lisa married in June 1995, formalizing a union that had already been carved by experience and tested by time. Seeking renewal and distance from old wounds, the couple packed up their young family and set off for Tampa, Florida. A stop in Clarksville, Georgia, to visit Roy's uncle Lenny changed everything. The mountains, the quiet, the honest pace of life. Georgia felt right. They stayed. It was a fresh beginning, but it wouldn't be the last. They tried Tampa again, but it proved too large, too loud. Georgia called them back, and in Cleveland, they planted their roots. Both Roy and Lisa began working in public service as dispatchers. Eventually, they each rose to become sworn officers, a remarkable arc especially for Lisa, whose quiet grit turned into command presence. She served with the White County Sheriff's Office and later with Hall County, earning respect through hard work and consistency. Roy, meanwhile, served with several departments: Cleveland, Helen, Baldwin, Habersham Schools, and Demorest PD, earning a reputation for his passion, sense of justice, and unshakable loyalty. But the years wore on him. A diving accident years earlier had left behind a neck injury that never healed quite right. Add to it diagnoses of lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and chronic pain, and eventually, retirement came out of necessity rather than choice. They left Georgia in 2018 for Tallahassee, Florida. A year later, Monticello became home, a quiet piece of land where generations live side by side. Roy and Lisa are now surrounded by their children and grandchildren, building a sanctuary forged not from luxury, but from love and resilience. Lisa's lineage, Caribbean and American, has shaped her into a bridge between cultures. Her time in law enforcement showed her strength, but her greatest badge remains the one worn at home: matriarch, mentor, and steady hand. Roy's journey is one of fire and reinvention, from the snowy mills of Rhode Island to the red clay roads of Georgia and the cypress-shadowed land of Florida. His wings have been stretched, battered, and mended time and again, and still he soars. Their story is not a fairy tale, it is a true tale, one of hardship, perseverance, redemption, and grace. Their home in Monticello is filled with echoes of laughter, firm lessons, and the kind of legacy that can't be bought or borrowed. In Nicole's fierce compassion, in Jose's resilience, in the wide eyes of their grandchildren, Mary Jane, Jameson, and Octavia, the legacy of Roy and Lisa Smith shines brightly. They are proof that family is not built by blood alone, but by the choices we make each day to stay, to grow, and to rise together like wings on the wind, always returning home. The Wolf of Monticello. Born on August 25, 1994, in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, Nicole Ann Smith Chandler entered the world as the newest branch of an old and mighty tree, its roots dug deep in the stony soil of Providence, its leaves rustling through centuries of change, war, toil, and tradition. From her earliest steps, Nicole bore a quiet fire, a daughter of the American Eagle, her father Roy Edward Smith Jr., a descendant of Mayflower Pilgrims and Rhode Island founders, and her mother Annalisa Marisa Goodwin Smith, whose Dominican roots and American grit formed a bridge between worlds. Nicole inherited both fire and grace. From her father, fierce spirit, unwavering loyalty, a love for liberty and justice. From her mother, relentless drive, profound strength, and a devotion to family that would become the heartbeat of her own life. Nicole's childhood followed the arc of her parents' brave choices. From the snow-covered rooftops of North Providence to the red clay hills of Georgia, and eventually the cypress-shadowed fields of Florida, Nicole was raised in a household where service, sacrifice, and storytelling wove the daily rhythm. She moved often, North Providence to Clarksville, Clarksville to Tampa, then back again to the small towns of northern Georgia, where her family rooted themselves among mountain folk and southern kin. Her upbringing was steeped in legacy. Stories of her great-grandfather Kenneth, a war hero who served in the Philippines, and of John the Miller Smith, her 17th-century ancestor who built the first grist mill with Roger Williams himself. These were not just tales, but the moral scaffolding of her soul. They taught her what it meant to be a Smith, to serve, to stand, to never back down when it came to defending what mattered. But Nicole was not born to soar alone. She was born to lead a pack. The wolf is her symbol. It's not just a creature she admires, it is a mirror to her own heart, fierce, alert, unyielding when her family is in need. A creature of loyalty, of strength, of maternal ferocity. She does not boast her virtues. She lives them in the way she raises her children, in the bond she holds with her husband, and in the steadfast love she offers her parents and grandparents every day. In 2016, Nicole married Shane Carl Chandler, a steadfast soul born on December 15, 1994 in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Shane's life had known both movement and loss. Raised partly in Menomonee, Wisconsin, he lost his father, Carl Ray Chandler Jr., when he was just 12 years old. His brother Austin would later pass in 2017, compounding the sorrow, but also galvanizing the resolve within Shane to honor the family he still had and to build the one he dreamed of. Together, Nicole and Shane formed a bond that was not forged in ease, but in fire. Their love, like the roots of the old Rhode Island oaks, dug deep through pain, hope, and loyalty. On April 7, 2016, they welcomed their first child, Mary Jane Catherine Chandler, a spirited, intelligent girl who carries her mother's cleverness and her father's grounding presence. On March 29, 2017, their son Jameson Roy Chandler arrived, wild-hearted but endlessly kind. His name a tribute to the family he represents. And on September 15, 2021, her grandfather Roy Jr.'s 50th birthday, they were blessed with Octavia Scarlett Chandler, the most vivacious of the three, her laughter the melody that stirs the home. Nicole's purpose was fully realized in motherhood. She became a lioness and a teacher. Her children are raised in the shadow of history, under the light of discipline and grace. She teaches them the Smith family code. We take care of each other. We do not start fights, but we will not walk away from one. Her parenting is as instinctive as it is intentional, a blend of ancestral wisdom and modern strength. Today, Nicole and Shane live on a 6-acre family homestead in Monticello, Florida, a quiet sanctuary shared by 4 generations. The property hums with children's footsteps, laughter in the trees, stories by firelight, and the scent of home cooking. It is a rare kind of peace, the kind built by hand, heart, and heritage. Shane works quietly but fiercely to support and protect his family. Though he's not loud in presence, he is a rock in the lives of his children and wife. His strength lies in his consistency, his humility, and the deep love he shows for his family each day. The hardships he endured have not made him bitter, but better. He's a father who kneels to tie shoes and a husband who stays steady through storm and sun alike. Nicole remains the fierce heart of this growing clan. She carries the flame of generations past, not merely in name, but in spirit. Her eyes gleam with the stories of the old country, and her words shape the future of the one to come. She is the wolf at the gate, watchful, wise, and unwilling to let the legacy fade. And when the time comes, it will be Nicole who tells the children where they came from. Of John Smith and the grist mill, of Kenneth and the Jungle War, of Anna Espinal's journey from the Caribbean, and the fires Roy Jr. and Lisa walked through to bring them all to this place. Of wolves and eagles, wings and fangs, duty and devotion. They will listen, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. Because in Nicole's voice, they will hear the echo of every ancestor before her. And in Shane's silence, they will feel the strength of roots wrapped deep in the earth. Their story is not one of fairy tale, but of frontier, of forged hearts and folded hands, of a family that refuses to break. And that is how legends are made. Stars in the Smith sky, the next generation. Mary Jane, Jameson, and Octavia Chandler. Mary Jane Catherine Chandler, the scholar of the pack. Born on April 7, 2016, in the foothills of Georgia, Mary Jane arrived with the quiet gaze of an old soul. From her first breath, it was clear, this child came into the world to understand it. She doesn't just learn, she absorbs. Top of her class year after year, she reads the world like a book she's already halfway through, constantly flipping ahead in her mind to see what comes next. Mary Jane is grace with grit. She loves pretty things, designer touches, coordinated outfits, the pinks and purples of girlhood. But beneath the ribbons and color palettes is a mind like tempered steel. She is already a leader in her own right, a little matriarch in the making, firm when needed, fair without fail. Like the many women in her line, she will someday run something big, a business, a community, maybe even a legacy. She rides horses with the poise of a frontier daughter and dreams with the spark of revolutionaries long past. If Mary Jane is anything, she is the quiet fire in the forest, controlled, warm, and impossible to ignore. Jameson Roy Chandler, the heart and humor. Born just under a year after his sister on March 29, 2017, Jameson Roy bears the name of the greats before him, his papa and Pepe, Roy, and his ancestor James. And while he may still be young, there's an echo in him of all those Smith men, brave, loyal, mischievous, and tender-hearted to the core. Jameson is a whirlwind of energy. He climbs what shouldn't be climbed, dives into what should be left dry, and laughs at things others fear. He is wild in the best ways, untamed, unbound by conformity, and utterly committed to joy. But oh, his heart, it's enormous. This is a boy who will stop mid-game to hug a crying friend or share his last cookie without a second thought. He is the trickster spirit of the Smith line, the jester with the king's blood. He may be a clown now, but he is the kind of man who will someday make a room feel lighter just by walking in. And when the moment comes to protect, Jameson will be the one who stands without flinching. His heart, his shield, his humor, his sword. Octavia Scarlett Chandler, the Starlet of September. Born on September 15, 2021, in Tallahassee, Florida, her Papa Roy's own birthday, Octavia came into the world like a party that never stopped. From her first steps, she danced. From her first giggle, she commanded the room. There is a kind of magic in Octavia, a performer's instinct that bubbles naturally from her like spring water from a hill. She sings to herself while coloring. She mimics voices, creates stories, strikes poses. She is joy personified, half firecracker, half Broadway show. When she laughs, it's contagious. When she enters a room, it feels fuller. Someday she might be on a stage, or in front of a camera, or simply lighting up every life she touches. In Octavia runs the charisma of a dozen storytellers, the humor of old taverns in Providence, the power of ancestors who dared to build something from nothing. She is the Smith song, the kind of child who will one day look back at this family story and carry it forward with drama, flair, and love. These children are the future of the Smith legacy. Through them, John the Miller's courage, Roger Williams' vision, Kenneth's quiet wisdom, Pepe's fire, and Nicole's fierce loyalty are all carried forward. They are the reason stories are remembered, the reason names live on. The land remembers. In the hush of Monticello's warm twilight, where the pines lean in close to whisper, a family walks a trail only they can see, a path worn not by footsteps alone, but by memory, blood, and the breath of generations. Beneath this Florida sky, where live oaks sway and grandchildren laugh among gardens and gravel, the Smith family endures. They are no longer millers by trade or pioneers by burden, but they are still builders of legacy, of home, of soul. They walk the earth their ancestors broke open, turned over, and named. Their story began in 1636 when John the Miller Smith, exiled beside Roger Williams, helped birth a dream called Providence, a place where faith was free and men could speak without chains around their tongues. That same spirit, unyielding, righteous, and kind, passed like a secret flame from father to son, mother to daughter, down through Benjamin, Solomon, Captain John, and Stephen, down through wars fought and homes built and mills turned by hand. Kenneth A. Smith, with grease on his palms and war in his eyes, came home from the Philippines and built a piece of his own, loving a woman not for what she could give, but for what she needed. He raised his children, not all his by blood, but all his by heart, and in doing so, taught that family is not just name, it is choice, sacrifice, and daily acts of loyalty. Roy Edward Smith, his son, carried that flame forward. A Marine in the long shadow of Vietnam, a firefighter, a teacher of tools, a night plower of snow, a ball buster with a heart of honey. He stayed in one home so his children would have stability, knowing too well the sting of being the new kid. He is a living testament to endurance, hard when needed, soft when allowed. In him is grit and giving, equal and eternal. And from him came his granddaughter, Nicole Ann Smith Chandler, the wolf. Fierce, protective, loyal to her pack above all. She is her father's fire and her mother's moonlight. She mothers with strength, partners with devotion, and leads with the same bone-deep integrity that John the Miller himself would recognize. Nicole carries the lineage in her very blood. She lives it with each choice she makes, to hold her children close, to teach them well, and to live not just for them, but through them. And so the legacy rests not only in old deeds and gravestones, but in Mary Jane's insight, Jameson's joy, and Octavia's sparkle. The Smith family, now far from Providence, still walks with Providence in them. They do not live in mansions, but in meaning. They do not build cathedrals, but character. They do not bear swords, but love, and it is the strongest weapon of all. The land remembers, the children grow, and the story ever onward unfolds. The Smiths remain, even though the name has changed. As I hand you this book, I hand you more than names and dates. I give you identity, honor, and the gentle whisper of a legacy that will never fade.